Absolutely, Kerry. Thanks so much. I think the discussion so far has actually answered quite a few of the questions that have been coming in, a lot around AI. There's probably one or two areas that we haven't covered, so I'll get to those. But one of the questions that came in, I see Autonomy Works had mentioned it, Rita Sony from Everest, thank you, and Dave Friedman, really asking around the impact with the current narrative that's out there regarding the impact in our sector on DEI and ESG and impact sourcing. And what has the impact been, or what is it going to be, and what should organizations and operators start considering around impact sourcing into the future? So I'm not sure who wants to pick that up.
I don't mind. Yeah. Yes, so I think that's a very good question. I think what we're hearing right now is that there definitely is a slowdown in corporate DEI spending. We're seeing that in the US that companies are reducing their formal DEI programs, and it's potentially implementing DEI-driven outsourcing partnerships. But then I think if you look at it from a global perspective, global enterprises are still prioritizing inclusive hiring and impact sourcing. You're seeing that happening with multinational companies that are prioritizing impact sourcing in Africa and Latin America, Southeast Asia, for example. And I think you're going to see that trend will continue. They're not necessarily going to be constrained by what happens, and it also be based on where they're headquartered. A lot of those organizations are not, are headquartered in Europe, or they're headquartered in India. And I think that will play a key factor in the decision for them to continue to utilize impact sourcing and inclusive hiring. And more than that, it comes down to the value that they receive from that. So I think impact sourcing is shifting from being, a corporate social responsibility initiative, which it's not. It's more about hiring talent that are committed, that are dedicated, that can generate real value for my organization on a year-on-year basis, which then translates into better customer lifecycle management and get better customer lifetime value. And I think that narrative is what should be adopted in the impact sourcing world. And we're seeing that in some of the work that we've done. We've actually got an index, the Thrive Index, where we've asked those questions, and organizations are saying they're focusing more on the value factor that impact sourcing can drive. So I think the business case for impact sourcing, it still remains strong. There still is the focus on ESG from markets in Europe, so that's still strong. And I think it's going to come down to that. I don't think it's necessarily going to fall away or deplete.
Yeah, and I was going to just add to that.
Sorry, go ahead, Dave.
Sorry, Peter. Okay, no, you go first this time. I keep cutting across to you,
cool.
so apologies.
Not at all, my friend. Listen, I want to echo what Mark was saying. I don't actually see a decline in the long term when it comes to ESG and DEI policies. I think they're probably going to be maintained, if not grow. There's been a few high-profile discussions in the media recently about some companies that have decided maybe to deprioritize it. But I generally don't think, from the anecdotal evidence I'm hearing from both the buyers as well as the outsourcers in the space right now, that these are programs that are going to be thrown out wholeheartedly. When it comes to the impact sourcing, Mark made a very good point I want to touch on, and that is he referenced the business case for impact sourcing. Now, this is, I think, the most important element that we should be talking about now when it comes to this business model. And unfortunately, and I've had this discussion with many of my friends in the space, the business case is what's going to count. That's where you're really going to start seeing the traction. If you can demonstrate that a worker that comes from an impact sourcing angle is going to be able to drive, another keyword Mark used, the value. That's what's going to be so important, so crucial in terms of maintaining this business model and making sure that it expands as a share of the workforce pie over the long term, because that's exactly what the clients are going to be looking for when they go to their outsourcers who are proposing impact sourcing. What is the business case? What's the value we're going to get from this? And then we'll move forward.
Yeah, and I was going to completely agree with you, Peter, so probably redundant, but I was going to say, I think when I've looked at impact sourcing and been around this area for 10, 15 years now, no one does it, or not many people do it just because to get that tick in the box. They have been bought into the value that it brings and the value that impact workers bring. And so I think it would be mad to think that people are going to throw that out, because now a government in the US have said, oh no, that's not important to us. I think that if you go back to the first principle of impact sourcing brings benefit to the business, then why would you throw that away? So I don't think the defocusing of DEI is going to have such a big impact on impact sourcing. And those who were doing it just to get the tick in a box probably aren't the ones who really embraced it anyway. The ones that fully embraced it and have got the full value will continue to stay invested, in my opinion.
And adding to that, with this whole, we really need to adjust to the new skill demands, right? And it's really key to with discussion, Peter, you talked about as well, is we're going to have labor shortages, and how do we adapt to this hybrid and remote working model? And I think just, you know, enterprises still engaged, still leveraging it. They may not call it out, but that's the trends we're observing as well.
Thank you, Naresh. I think something I'd probably just want to add on to that, and Kerry, I know we've had this discussion before, but when it comes to traditional impact sourcing, and I think the reason that Rita probably raised this question from an Everest perspective, she's been deeply involved in the work as well, is that impact sourcing at its fundamental core is about the intentional recruitment of individuals from marginalized communities. DEI has been given a bad reputation recently, I think unjustly so. But it's assuming that the individuals that are being employed under a DEI banner are less than or not capable. Impact sourcing is looking at a broad community of individuals that are marginalized. And if we look at some examples, there's a phenomenal center in Cape Town that runs and hires in differently abled individuals from a hearing impairment perspective. So it's really about looking beyond your traditional recruiting and traditional sourcing when you're bringing individuals into the organization. And I don't see any reason for that to stop, or for that to not be a request that organizations are looking for. We're also looking at how it is that we're expanding the individuals that are servicing the customer, and the customer themselves may actually come from a marginalized environment. So we're also seeing that that is working when we see that we have like with like servicing customers from a client perspective. So it's really opening up the pot a little bit more and bringing diversity in from a servicing perspective, as Mark said, not from a charitable CSR perspective. So I think that we definitely have had some positive responses there. Kerry, I don't know if you wanted to add on to that, because I know that Debbie, you and I have been chatting about impact sourcing and ESG quite a bit.
Well, I think that's a program of work that we're certainly looking at doing across the council, isn't it? So there's been lots of conversations, and hopefully 2025 will be the year that we get it over the line of dusting down the global impact sourcing standard. Because one person's impact sourcing is another person's basic hiring. And I think there are a lot of companies that do too much social washing about the impact sourcing they do, which, you know, to many organizations is just hiring people in developing countries. So I think we've got to bring a degree of substance and standardization about the term impact sourcing and what good impact sourcing actually looks like. So so Debbie, I don't know if you're on and you want to add to that, because obviously IOP has been doing a great deal of work in your Centre for Social Impact.
Yes, and what we've been doing together with Formiga, and what Everest Group has been doing. Rita does amazing work, and certainly you, Tracy. We've been driving this for a long time. And I just want to ensure going forward that it doesn't lose traction because of everything that is going on. So I think it's a little bit of stand by. We're working on it. We are collectively trying to move the ball forward. And I think everybody has a role to play. So I think that's what's incredibly important. So get on the bandwagon and join us, you know. Kerry, I think maybe we should consider having another webinar just on that, maybe an open forum, as we've talked about in, you know, just recently. So maybe this group is ready to take that on. Thanks.
Excellent. Thanks, Debbie. Thanks, Kerry. And I think for any of the capitalists in the room, at the end of the day, impact sourcing is about growing your next customer base as well, because they become financially viable themselves. So there's also that aspect to consider. So,
hey, Trace, can I just say something very quickly before you dive in? Kerry made a point about the different angles and the different approaches around impact sourcing. And I think that's a very important element to this. I think that one of the more understated ones that truly deserves a lot more discussion are the impact sourcing initiatives happening in places like Canada, where I am, or the United States, in perhaps marginalized neighborhoods of large urban centers. I know that we've seen some of that in different parts of Western Europe too. There's so many different examples and so many different facets of what this business model means, and almost the immediate impact that it can take to a neighborhood. So I would echo Debbie's point about maybe a separate webinar to do a deep dive and to parse some of these elements out, because there's so many elements of value that could be brought to the table using impact sourcing, and so many different approaches that it can be done by.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Peter. Thanks for the question, Rita. Naresh, this one came in for you, and I'd be interested to see what your response is. So this comes from Imran Kara from the Strategic Thinking Company. He wanted to know, you made a statement that 2024 was a year of pause. He wants to know, what is it that you foresee for 2025? Is it acceleration, recalibration, or transformation?
So we're observing, I guess, a little bit of all of that, because enterprises are waking up, recognizing they need to drive change, and the last few months we've seen significant shift in the demand for driving that level of change, enabling technologies on that front. So we're definitely seeing that shift occurring, but again, every enterprise, every buyer is going through carefully, giving them guidance. We're giving them guidance on a strategic way to get this done. I think several, Peter, David, Todd talked about the whole governance structure as well, because it's not just about spending the money, it's about finding the right approaches to get the value to them. And in a lot of our clients that we've worked with, we've seen some significant shift in adding value to their operations. So that's what's key moving forward. Hopefully this answers the question.
I hope so. Thank you for the response. Thanks for the question, Imran. All right, this one I'm going to throw open. Interesting one. What 3 things could geographies do to equip themselves as best as possible for changes in the sector? Very big open question. And I think we probably touched on a few aspects, but I'm assuming that this is meaning more your supply geographies as opposed to your source market geographies, but I suppose it could be across the board. So I don't know who has some suggestions on the top 3 things that locations and geography should do to equip themselves for the current changes.
Trace, can I take a stab at it? I mean, it's very wide open, but I think there's a few different elements. One of them is going to be workforce training and education, and evolving that to the extent that when people from, or companies from sourcing markets decide that they need to try and establish partnerships in other countries, in the offshore and the nearshore, to make sure that the labor force is equipped, is ready to hit the ground running, because the lag times are getting a heck of a lot lower than they were in the past. I'd say something else, this is just an observation. I truly think that if an offshore destination or a nearshore destination is going to have a shot at winning more business or winning more investment, they truly have to stand out. They have to find a niche. It's not business as usual like it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago. It's not your mess for less and we're cheaper. And I cringe every time I see a BPO provider in the nearshore and the offshore start promoting themselves based around cost and price, because that's not what it comes down to. That's part of the equation, but quality, value, what you bring to the table in terms of compliance, in terms of governance, and I think that word that Naresh used a few minutes ago is so important. The element of standards that you bring to the table is really going to be a determinant in making sure that you're not even winning the business, but even considered for the business. There's too much genericization in terms of destinations that we've seen over the course of the past couple of decades. And that's got to change if any location or organization within a nearshore or offshore location is going to have a shot at winning contracts.
Excellent. Thanks. Does anybody want to add on to that?
Could I add to that, Tracy, as well? I think I'm just going to mention two things. I think earlier on in my opening statements, I mentioned the verticalization that's taking place and the need to specialize on industry-specific services. And I think that trend can help locations differentiate themselves and also develop niche capabilities in some of these new sub-verticals and sectors that we've seen coming out: fintech, health tech, cybersecurity, legal tech, for example, climate tech are just some of the areas. And I think they could look at how they can differentiate themselves more and grab these opportunities and train their workforces in domain-specific applications. And then I think the second area is an interesting area to consider. Maybe not, maybe it won't happen immediately, but certainly something to consider. On the call today, we do have a lot of regional associations that represent different regions: Africa, the Latin America and Caribbean region, and they represent industry bodies in those respective regions. The focus could be that the regions also start adopting a multi-sourcing, multi-talented approach where they start collaborating more, for example, across different hubs within their regions. And I think that could be one that can be a consideration for the future, is regional cooperation, regional collaboration across multiple locations in the same region.
So I'd like to add to what Mark and Peter just talked about as well. So if you really think about and companies, providers, service providers, BPO or whatever, from that perspective, they're always focused on new logos, right? And growing from that perspective. I think given the world we're in, the situation we're dealing with today, the crisis, you're familiar with your clients. You need to leverage your brand, enable the technologies to help them drive the transformation, and use the knowledge you have about your existing buyers and drive that growth internally so you can expand that business. Going to what Mark talked about, look at the different vertical sectors. You have that experience, build on it. I think that's what's going to help providers, BPOs, whatever, to really grow that business from that perspective. Yes, you can also go after new logos, but the growth area, we believe, is really important. Since you're familiar with the client, you're familiar with their operations, you're familiar with their business, and drive that enablement, technology enabled, to help them. That I think that's really what's going to be key. And of course, invest in partnerships with technology players, right? Because the technology side has been the big shift. It's the labor arbitrage we talk about going down, but the technology side has been growing up, the investments and how people are leveraging that. So I think this is going to be the approach that everybody needs to look at from providing these services to the buyers, to our clients.
Thanks very much. Thanks, gents. And just making sure that when we're investing in the technology, we're not forgetting about the people and keep building on those skills as well. Absolutely. Excellent. Kerry, there's a number of questions. I think I'm going to throw one last one into the room and see what responses come through and then pass back to you. Let's see who wants to pick this one up. There were a number of questions, as we know, around AI, and I think we've covered a lot of that. Certainly, there's a lot more that could be discussed there. But the other question that was coming up a lot, it was asked in a couple of different ways. But what does the panel think the impact of the pending tariffs and the shifts and changes in legislation in the US is going to do to the global outsourcing and offshoring market? I'm not sure. I think we touched on it a little bit about some political and global changes or legislative changes, but I'm not sure if anybody wants to pick that up in a more direct response.
Do you want to take this since you're on the screen?
I was going to hand it to Peter.
Yeah. Sorry, for coming from the 51st state.
Yeah, goodness. This question keeps me up at night. It really does. I don't have an answer. Just to let you know what I write notes, at night, and I think history can tell us that there are certain milestones we should be looking for in behavior of nations and nation states, and nationalism is one of those key things that you have to look out for. And whenever nationalism begins to occur, we not only see things like tariffs, but we see things like service taxes. And for anyone that's ever tried to develop a sourcing solution in LATAM, for example, you can see the echoes of Hugo Chavez, right? Everything from the concerns around currency manipulation to the direct service taxes on outsourced services are very high. And so, you know, I am concerned about this, given that North America is one of the largest consumers of outsourcing services, that there is going to be a move beyond manufacturing and begin looking at the service segment. So I don't have an answer, but there are key milestones I'm looking for, and it is worrying.
There's also,
it is worrying.
I would say,
Oh, sorry, Naresh, go ahead.
But no, Peter.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you very much. Look,
I didn't want to be David and cut you off. I apologize.
No. David and I are old friends, so he can cut me off anytime. Listen, I'm going to say this. I think that the impact right now, at least for the foreseeable future, is just what Todd referenced, and that is this sword of Damocles hanging over the service sector with a huge degree of uncertainty that we don't know where things are going to go. And I say this as living in a country that was literally threatened with tariffs up until a few hours before they were supposed to come in. And I can tell you the extent to which people and businesses were going crazy here. Now, just imagine if we are constantly having this cycle happening over and over and over, and the moment that somebody is going to anger a member of a certain administration, this is going to be put back onto the table. It's going to be very damaging in terms of business confidence, the ability to plan, and if they ever did get implemented by the world's largest consumer economy, well, I mean, the impact would be tremendous on the service space. Let there be no doubt about it. The problem that we're facing, especially from the front line of BPO, is that it's a highly politically sensitive area. Everybody has had a horror story that they had with a contact center, and the immediate assumption is that it was one that was the offshore. It's not necessarily the case, but that's the immediate assumption. And the moment that this gets highlighted, the moment that there's something that happens that highlights the service sector and the idea about putting tariffs on it, I mean, watch the space. It could be literally disastrous. And I tend to be an optimist. I'm very glass half full. But I think, Todd, you gave us a very good dose of reality. And also something I took from your comments is learn from history, because it's bound to repeat itself unless we keep it in mind.
And thank you, Peter. So just adding to that, I'm not sure if the services fall under the tariff section, but that's something we still have to determine and the implication. However, let's look at this from a different perspective. There's new opportunities in emerging markets. There's going to be a shift. So, you know, maybe there's a BPO or a GCC that gets set up near shore or in the US, for example, using that example, or a different country in Europe, et cetera. But I think there's we need to be able to adapt, be ready to adjust to the changing conditions and this disruption. I mean, look at what happened with supply chain when we had the crisis going back to 2020, right? Everybody started to realize that if I just have a sole source supplier somewhere on the Far East, but now I need to bring it closer because the implications to my manufacturing, et cetera. So I think we have to look at it differently and just adapt to those needs and be ready for it. And I'm glad, Peter, that the 51st state declined, did not put any tariffs on bourbon, et cetera. So I think that helped the situation there.
Yeah, and the only other thing I would add is, I mean, I think that that's totally aligned to the thinking, but I think that what we're seeing is that focus on the business continuity planning is important. So I think that goes to, I mean, we saw it through COVID, that I think everyone's paid lip service to BCP for the last 20 years. I think COVID really brought it into attention. I think thinking about your strategy moving forward and having a robust BCP, if you've got enough volume to have multiple suppliers in whatever part of BPO you're in, then actually you might be able to balance and actually adjust to be able to do that. So I definitely think the business continuity planning is an important factor as you start thinking about a lot of uncertainty that seems to be in there from the current administration.
And if I could just also add my perspective, I think the where the potential impact could be is in the mid-sized market. So the mid-sized BPOs, those organizations, I think there could be potential impact there. When you look at some of your larger your tier one BPOs, they're headquartered in other countries, and economies of scale are going to apply to them. They're going to still look at where are the best locations to go to, where can they tap into the best talent, and cost is still going to be a factor for them. So I think that's still going to drive outsourcing. But I think the current shifts that we're seeing is probably going to impact more your mid-sized operators, and those are the ones that are going to have to think more carefully about what strategies they adopt, and do they diversify? Do they look at other ways to other ways to adapt their strategies in order to work with this current trend that they're seeing?
Yeah, excellent. If I just sort of say from Mark and Naresh's comments, we'll bring in a blast from the past and a 2020 word, and just say that our industry is very good at pivoting, because that was a 2020 word. So yeah, I think we'll probably see us pivoting. So excellent. Lots more questions, but I think we've kind of hit the nub of most of them there, Kerry. So if I can pass back to you.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Tracy, and thank you everyone for the questions that you've posed. So just as we get close to wrapping all of this up, I guess there are a couple of killer questions, and that would be maybe for each of you to think about two questions from me. One is to think about what big piece of advice would you give to everybody on this webinar as to what they should, their immediate takeouts, what should they do differently, what do they need to do tomorrow? And if you could think of it from both the service provider and the buyer perspective, that would be great. So so yes, and then the second question would be, just a summary of your prediction of where we're going to be as an industry in 2030. So really small questions, really easy to answer. Don't know who's ready to go first with those.
I'm happy to go first, and then I won't cut across Peter either that way. So I mean, these are a little bit basic, but I think they would be advice, and to do differently or do tomorrow for both a buyer and a provider. And it sounds very trite, but it actually is true, is don't panic. I think that we are seeing a lot of organizations running around going, oh, we got to do an AI pilot, as someone mentioned earlier, because their boss is asking them, what are we doing? They're running around and doing pilots, and pilots are spinning up all over the place. So I would say advice would be to both sides is don't panic, and actually make all of the work that you're doing, if specifically around AI, very focused around the business problem it's solving and the use case, not just I've got 15 AI pilots, but it's actually which are the business problems they're trying to solve. If we think about what the industry is going to look like in 2030, I wish I knew really, because I'd probably put some bets on it. But for me, I think it won't look that different. I think going back to the timeline that we were saying earlier, I don't think this whole thing about, oh, it's going to look that different. If we look back at 2020 and we had this call, let's say just before COVID, if we said what does 2025 look like, we might have come up with all these fanciful ideas using Peter's 1999 references earlier. But actually, are we that different? Yeah, we've got a lot of technology, but most of the services are still delivered in a very same way. 70% of revenue for service providers is still through voice on CX, for example, based on our research. So I think we could fatalize about what 2030 looks like. I think it will definitely be a lot more technology supporting the people doing the work. I think there will be some new destinations or works being done from, but if I'm honest, I don't think it'll be dramatically that different from where we are today, but we would have evolved. And I think there's just that the industry's been great at evolving for the last 25 years, and I think it will continue to evolve.
Thank you, David. Naresh is coming on in.
I'll jump in before Peter. So if you really think about helping look at the Gen 3.0 outsourcing approach, so definitely data-driven enabled service, technology-enabled services, something that we need to embrace moving forward. Also, from a global delivery optimization, really have to shift from the way we've looked at it in the past to again, distributing resource to balance of cost effectiveness with service excellence. And the third component will be the operating model change. It's really focused on, I think, Mark talked about the verticalization, looking at from a vertical perspective and looking at industry perspective to drive these efficiencies that our clients are looking for, helping them get to a better place. And that's what drives success for us as well.
Super. I'll go next, Carrie. Listen, in terms of advice I would give the buyer, I would say be as demanding as possible from the prospective service suppliers that you're looking for. Demand use cases, demand to see what their subject matter expertise is in particular domains that they're looking to engage on, and make sure that they hold the provider to a very high standard when they're looking to try and engage. And once they've engaged, there's no two ways about it. The partnership, absolutely, but the client is certainly paying the bills, and they should expect the best possible results. From the outsourcer standpoint, my advice would be find ways of not being generic, find ways of standing out as much as you possibly can from the rest of the crowd. Take a look at all the outsourcers' websites right now. I guarantee that if you were to take the graphic design and the logos out, they would all be 90% the same, and there's just a huge amount of overlap. That's unacceptable in this market, and it's unacceptable for the buyers. 2030, it's not too far away, but I remember back in 1988 when I was in grade 10, we did an exercise where we were asked what was it going to look like when the year 2000 hit, and the most pervasive comment was, oh, we're all going to be driving flying cars. I mean, just absolute nonsense. And I think what Dave said is bang on about the industry. I don't think it's going to look that different than it does now. And it certainly doesn't look that different from it did 20 years ago when I got into it. I think there's going to be a heck of a lot more enablement around technology, enabling business process workers and making things a lot more efficient. But really, this is still a human-led game.
Mm-hmm.
Mark, I was going to jump in there if it's okay. I think, Carrie, my advice for the enterprises and the suppliers is the same. And that is, think about your interaction with service providers as a partnership, right? So what you're demanding, if you think about Peter's bar that he's setting, you're setting a high bar for the service. And then the question is how do you collaboratively work with a service provider to meet those targeted objectives? Because sometimes to hit those targeted objectives, the enterprise is going to have to do things differently, right? Sometimes it may require an investment on the service provider's standpoint, but unless you kind of have those open, transparent, collaborative conversations with your partner candidates, you're simply going to regress to purchasing a commodity, right? So find a way to have these open conversations with your potential partners. And then in terms of what does the world look like in 2030, I agree with the panel. I don't think it's going to look significantly different, but I do have a thought about maybe 10 more years out. I believe a lot of the services that the service providers are currently providing, I think we may see those being ingested by the platform providers. So all the software as a service providers. I think we're going to see more and more of that functionality being pulled in to the base technology. And so our service providers are going to either have to force their way up into the judgment-oriented activities or find a way to exist.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Food for thought. So yeah.
Yeah, I'll just add my last piece of that. So I think I'm very much in agreement with what everybody said. That kind of echoed what I was thinking. I think that the key for me is to stop thinking about BPO as a location decision, but more as about it as being a capability decision. And so there's the need to start not just focusing on labor arbitrage while cost is still a major factor. Start looking on focusing more on capability, on flexibility, on specialization. Vertical specialization specifically is the key focus area. So transform into centers of excellence is important, as opposed to just being cost saving hubs. And very much expertise driven outsourcing is where I think both BPOs and locations should shift to. And then over and above that, there's this trend, as I mentioned earlier on, it was one of the three predictions that I made, that your CX focused BPOs will transition and start, going into other areas of outsourcing, like finance and accounting, like legal services, digital services, and the reverse effect for your IT outsourcing providers. And I think that trend can be capitalized on more. You're seeing a lot of benefit on their businesses by transitioning into other areas of outsourcing, not just being CX focused. And I think that trend should be picked up on and should be adopted.
Excellent. Thank you all so much. Yeah, so I think the overriding theme is, business as usual, carry on innovating, carry on collaborating, and at the end of the day, this is a people industry. So we're buying and delivering people, so we need to do that in a really, truly ethical way. Look after our people, upskill our people, stop them being concerned about the impact of AI, and equip them to actually be able to use AI to better deliver their services. So one last question, I guess, and Debbie and Tracy, I want you both to chime in here as well. What would you like to see the Global Technology and Business Services Council do in 2025 and beyond? What role do you see us having? I made a couple of notes that I've taken out. One was, is there room for a global conference or a global trade show? So that's picking up on what Peter said is what buyers are actually using. The other is really a role of looking at what talent is going to be needed. So that's picking up on something that David talked about, and what talent is going to be needed into the future, and how do we actually employ that talent? Are we using gig workers? Are we using impact sourcing? Obviously, there is work in play, and I think that's definitely something that the Global Council should continue with, is looking at developing a best practice around impact sourcing. And the other area that I put down here as something we could look at is actually creating a repository of successful deployments of AI that we could share on a global stage, so that we can understand how AI is being used successfully and get things going past the pilot stage for the industry. So those are a couple of things I've put down, but I'd be really interested to hear your views.
Can I just jump in real quick? One of the things we've started to talk about at our last two events in Chicago was around the European guardrails, so to speak, or the implementation of the restrictions, I guess, around AI, and how that is going to roll out globally, and will it? So I think perhaps getting some of our great legal minds involved in something like that would be very helpful across the board. It's one of the most popular things we've done. So that is one. And then with the talent, with respect to AI, where is it going to come from? Do we even know what's needed? And the upskilling and the reskilling keeps coming up. And I think that's really critical. And I think we've got so many great advisors that can really help us there. And again, the impact sourcing piece, because I'm so worried now with everything that all we've worked for is just going to kind of go on the back burner if we don't drive it forward. And this group is probably uniquely qualified to do that. Other than that, I think you're really spot on with what you've got on the list. Tracy, how about you?
Yeah, thanks, Debbie. I mean, I think you've mentioned something that the GTM-BSC team have discussed over the last couple of years, actually, understanding that it's uniquely positioned to be a collective sort of pot or voice for a global community that's all playing in the same space. And that's what's so beautiful about this industry, is that it absolutely is global. We connected across oceans like never before, which is fantastic. But it's really about that repository piece. I know we've spoken about that, and beyond AI, Kerry, because there's those that want to know and those that think that they know, and how do we kind of get them together to be able to convene and discuss what is it that the source markets are looking for? What is it that the delivery market should be responding to? And this is a great sort of opportunity for those conversations to collide in a positive way. And when it comes to the standards piece, I know, again, we started putting together kind of that global framework of what is talent, what skills are required. And we actually pulled in a lot of global information so that we could compare apples with apples from one location to another and call it the same thing. We got so far and became a bit of a monster that I think we all sort of got caught in the spaghetti bowl and didn't quite know where to continue. And equally, I think we started right in the infancy of AI to say, you know, what is needed, what is it? But so far, I mean, the greatest minds haven't managed to kind of specify this is what the standards look like and what they are, because it's a constantly daily emerging thing. But that's me saying here's all the barriers or the challenges, but I do believe that this community, this team is well positioned to help support the continued development of the sector. So if those are the sort of the call outs and what we've seen coming through, and anything else that the community that's joined us today or beyond that consumes this once we put up the recording, any suggestions, advice, ideas, what they need, you know, that's why the GTM BSc exists. I'm not sure if the panel has any sort of ideas or inputs from their vantage point.
We must be doing a great job.
Well, yes, everyone can contact GTM BSc. We are as an organisation on LinkedIn, so start following us and get involved. You can obviously email us. Shivani, I don't know if you want to just quickly splash the screens that have got everyone's email addresses on. That would be great. And we'd love to hear from everybody with their ideas on what this Global Council can do moving forward. So, so I don't know if we can flash that screen, Shivani. There we go. Just so you've got the email addresses for everybody on from the industry experts, and also Debbie, Tracy, and myself. There we go. So we'll just flash those quickly. And as we flash those, it just leaves me to say a massive, massive thank you to all of our industry experts. It's been an absolute whirlwind session. My mind is absolutely boggling. I can't wait to rewatch it, where I can actually just listen to all of the expert insights you've imparted without having to think about the next question and what's coming in from the panel. So this will all be made available to everybody that registered. So and we'll be producing a summarized version and snippets and sound bites and sharing those predictions with everybody. So huge thank you to all of you. So thanks very much to Mark, Naresh, David, Peter, Todd, and also to Debbie and Tracy. Thank you very much for all the great work
everyone.
you're doing for
Thank you. Great discussion.
Thank you all so much. Relax.
Bye.
Have great evenings. Have great days.
Take
Thank
care.
you.
Thank you.
And thank you all for joining us and for all of your comments.